start is if you could put in the chat to introduce yourself, briefly, who are you, where are you from, and just a comment or so on what you consider to be a sustainable program. If y'all could take a minute and put that in there, and Sonia will be watching the chat. And Sonia, if you could just share with me some of the comments folks have made, that'd be great.
Most definitely.
A lot of different ways to think about what a sustainable program is. But what is it to you?
Okay, we are getting some responses in the chat box. We have from Amy, Miss Amy, she says, her program name. Something, Vicky says something that's fixing a problem is sustainable to her. Mike says he's from West Michigan. Guys, make sure you're coming in on mute. Thank you so much. A program which is able to function with a lot of
thank you. Yeah.
staff resources. So I'll repeat that again. Mike says a program which is able to function with allotted financial and staff resources.
I appreciate that, how you said both financial and staff, right?
Someone else said sustainable means services are provided at equal or greater from year to year. I may have said that wrong.
Okay.
Megan says, she says, for me, sustainable programming is being able to execute your mission, serve our young people without the pressure of loss of funding, being able to do the work. Yes.
That's a really good comment about how funding gets in the way of us being able to do our work. And I think that's what makes fundraising such an important part of our job, is it's the only way we can provide for our families and our young people the way that we want to.
Exactly. There are a few more. I'll go ahead and read them, and then I will go to mute. Sustainable program, I believe it is producing benefits that service our target market and evolving with the needs of those who we are serving with conversion capabilities.
Oh, nice. How about one more?
Sure, let's do one more. Let's see, this one says sustainable program is a sufficient program that offers many resources and being able to deliver exactly what you say your company offers.
Perfect. So when we talk about sustainability, we have so many different things that come into play with it, with funding being the bottom line, always, sadly, but always, in order to get the resources. Now, funding can come in, the form of money, or it can come in kind donations, different things that we can provide directly to our clients and to our families. But for sure, money is sadly the bottom line. So let's think about this. So here's a kind of a quick one you can put on there. What's the one thing you love about fundraising? This one's always a fun question. What do you love about fundraising? What is the one thing you love about fundraising? I'm not seeing the chat light up as fast. What's happening here, folks?
Oh, it's lighting up now. There it is. Networking. Sharing
nice.
Stories about how we serve our community. Networking again, the interaction and networking. Networking is trending. The events. Let's see. To be able to offer resources at a low cost to our Girl Scouts every year. Once again, we have community networking, getting donors excited about the programming we offer and becoming a part of the success. Very good. Seeing families engaged, bragging about our incredible people in the field, selling what we do, the stories from those who believe in the cause, meeting new people, and there it is, networking again.
I love the theme that came up through that, and how That is a bottom line of fundraising. Networking, meeting people, and telling our stories is exactly how we create sustainable programs.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we need good programs to be able to sell, to be able to tell a good story. But that's the important part about fundraising. So this one's an easy one. If you could just put in the chat a number, whether you use my numbers I suggested or different numbers, but how many different sources do you receive funds from predominantly? Is it one or two sources? Just one? Is it a half dozen? How many different sources do you have for funding? Out of 3 to 5, I'm seeing. How many people? Different sources. People would be one source. Have it see a none? A 3 to 5, a 1.
Yes.
Okay.
10 plus from
Oh, that's
some.
good.
1 to 3, 10 plus 4 to 5, and someone says none yet.
None yet. There you go. That's a growth mindset. I love that. That's a great word. None yet. Okay. And if you could just kind of quickly say, what are those sources? Like, are they, well, let's start with this. If you lost your largest funder, could you continue to provide services? Yes or no? If you lost your one largest funder, could you provide services?
Wow, a lot of no's, some yeses, but one said it would be tight.
Right.
Yes.
And that's pretty typical for a lot of us. Probably not at the current level. Sure. Absolutely. So just then really quick, are your sources generally, are they state or federal? Is that one main source? Are they fees? Are they foundations? Just give us an idea of where most of your funds are coming from.
We have some state and federal. We have some that are receiving fees. There are some that are doing out-of-pocket costs, subsidies and grants and fees, a mix of state, fed, foundation grants.
Perfect. So it sounds like we have a pretty eclectic group here, getting funds from different sources. So then I would just say the last thing is, if you can learn one thing while you're here today, one thing you can walk away with, what would it be? If I can share one thing with you that make you feel really good about the time you invested today. Grant writing. Nothing too specific, just looking for general information. Is that the sense I'm getting?
It seems to be that way, yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so what I'm going to do is share with you the agenda. I'm thinking what we'll do is we'll talk about what the state of giving is, where we're at in our country, how we get ready to ask for funds, different sources of funds, and then how to ask for funds, and then just kind of looking at how fundraising is fun and how it can definitely be all of that. So the state of giving in the United States is we have over 1.5 million charitable organizations. And that is a lot of organizations. And as friendly as most nonprofits are and charitable organizations are, it is a very competitive market. And we really have to think of it that way. It's just like any other business. It's a highly competitive business of raising funds. Now, we raised over $1.5 trillion just in one quarter of 2022. So there's a huge impact on both the country's economy as well as our local economies when it comes to nonprofits. And we're over 5% of the country's gross domestic national product. So we have a huge impact. And that's one of the messages that we keep in mind that we can send to people we are requesting funds from, is that the funds that are raised through these nonprofits are directly impacting the communities that they're in, both in the way of providing services to the young people and the families in the communities, but also that money, most of that money is going right back into the community by means of a job, by means of impact in purchasing products. So that impact continues to grow beyond just the program. Now, there's multiple revenue sources that we're going to get into deeper as we continue the conversation, but we know that we get program service fees. There's different sources of contributions, and there's different sources of income. There's also some organizations do related revenue programs. So we have an opportunities as charitable organizations to be able to raise money and even earn money from a variety of different sources. And if you look at those sources, what they are, and this is really important to think about. So when we think about philanthropic dollars, so I saw many of you mention foundations, some individual donors. You think about where the money comes, philanthropic money, it's coming predominantly from individuals. So there's almost $500 million. And if you add bequests into that, which are planned giving, generally done in the form of a will or a trust, you've got $5.5 billion a year that's coming from individual donations. And a lot of us tend to forget about those individual donors. And it's significant. It's actually more than 5 times what the foundations give. So depending on the community you're in, of course, that varies greatly. Some communities have a high level of local foundations, family and community foundations with significant giving. Other communities don't have very many at all. And then corporations tends to be, about 21 billion. What's interesting about that is just considered philanthropic giving too. So when it comes to corporate donations, some of them come in as sponsorships, and the corporations may actually qualify or consider those to be marketing dollars. So that number is kind of all over the place, but that gives you an idea. And it tells us that there's a significant amount of money out there, funds we can raise through those local foundations, but also let's really keep in mind the individual donors that we have the ability to affect. And they can really make a difference in our programs. So any questions so far, just put them in the chat. Raise your hand. Sonia, I think, can keep an eye on you, but I think the chat is safer. So let's think about how we ask for money. And this is true whether we're doing grant writing, individual donations, if we're going to foundations, if we're going to whatever source it may be, we have to be able to build our case. And that was something that one of you mentioned early on is I love to tell my story. Being a good storyteller is being a good fundraiser. And it can be anecdotal. It can also be somewhat data driven, and we should look at data. Generally, we have both in our audience. We have people who want to hear the story about the one young person whose life was changed. And then we have the other person that wants to see the data that they're building a growth mindset, or our young people are increasing their resiliency skills, or whatever that might be. And then thinking about outcomes versus outputs. One thing we tend to see a lot of nonprofits doing is reporting outputs. And outputs are important. Outputs are things like we had, 50 kids in program, and we served 200 meals over the course of the week, and we did this number of hours in homework, or we did this number of STEM hours. And those are all really important, and you should keep track of that. And most of us do a really good job of keeping track of that. But early on, someone asked me a question that somewhat offended me at first, but it's a really good question. When I was telling them what my outputs were, they looked at me and said, so what? So what if kids come to your program? So what? And I was like, well, that's not very nice. Of course, it's very important. That's what, so what? Well, what they were saying to me is take that a step further. What is actually happening? How is life actually being better? How are families actually benefiting when those young people are in your program? So take that a step further. Yes, they come. So what? Well, what is the so what? They're not out on the streets. They're in supervised environments. They are getting tutoring. Okay, so they're getting tutoring. So what? Well, their grades are improving, or the quality of time for the families in the evening is improving. So it's really important that you're able to build your case and to tell your story and to do it using outcomes as well as outputs. Then you need to be able to talk about why you need it. Why do you need the support and who will benefit? So as obvious as that seems, again, the better story you tell, a little bit deeper dive that you take, the further off you will be ahead of clearly your competition. And people have choices, obviously, where they give their money. So you want them to feel good about choosing you. So why do you need the support? Well, who will benefit are the families that you serve. But again, you can take that further than that. You can take the businesses where the parents are able to work longer hours, stay involved in their jobs because their young people are in safe environments. There's lots of different needs that you're meeting through your program, and think broadly about that. The other thing is, let's talk about how much money you actually want to raise. And I encourage you to just pop in the chat right now a number. How much money, if you could raise, how much more money? What are you looking for? Are you looking for $2,000? Are you looking for $2 million? What's your goal? $65,000? $40,000? $300? No, that doesn't scare us. 50 to 75, 45. So think about those numbers. We have $1 million plus. Okay. No goal, as much as I can. I like that. And honestly, that's kind of how we started, is our mindset was around being able to provide as many services as we possibly could. And so whatever money that we raised, we would provide services with. And clearly that's what most of us want to do. But think about how there's two ways to look at funds, and we'll get a little bit more into sustainability. So if you are currently receiving enough funds to provide programming at the level that you're providing it, but you want to raise more money, then what is it you can do with those additional funds? So even if you're in a position where you have enough money to fund your program today, when we think about how, especially those of us who only have one or two sources, or who by losing one or two sources would either shut down our programs or significantly affect our ability to provide programs, we really need to think about how do we diversify that funding at this point in time, and sometimes before we feel like we actually need it. So one of the things that can come out of this conversation around goals is that identifying what you need it for, even though you may have enough to do what you're doing now. So could you use money for capital? Could you serve more students? Could you serve more families? Could you bring in extra opportunities for your young people? So we'll come back to that a little bit as we go. And then who are your prospects? Who can you ask? And those are whether they're individuals or foundations, but really sitting down and thinking about who the folks are that you can engage and approach. And then with that, who should ask? So when we think about people who are going to ask others for support, it isn't always the executive director or the president. It isn't even always a board member, but sometimes it is. When we go into and start thinking about doing actual asks with donors, we want to make sure that the right person is asking and that they have the right tools to ask. So some of the tools that they need include, let's see what happened here. There we go. Let's think about how public relations and how you're going to get your message out. So there's things around that you have to be able to tell your story, and means and methods, right, to get that story out there. Think about how much lead time you have. So this is one of the dangerous things for our nonprofits, and especially our out of school time programs, who are struggling with, I have a lot of money now, or I have enough money now, but I can't trust those funds. Well, we can't trust any real source of funds, generally speaking, because things change, priorities change. And when you're dealing with philanthropic dollars, whether they're state, federal, or local, people, if their priorities change, they can decide to no longer fund you. So the problem can be about waiting until, say, the 11th hour to decide you need to start raising money. So you may have just got in a 3-year or a 5-year award and you're feeling pretty good about it. And that can seem like it's a long time. But the lead time that it takes when you're doing fundraising can be significant, because you are doing so much storytelling and you're doing so much networking and you're doing so much to get your messaging out in the community, that that's really hard to do when you're now down to 6 months or even a year when you're going to need your funding. So keeping that in mind. Keeping in mind what the true cost of fundraising is. So as we talk about different modes of raising money, a lot of times it becomes more expensive to raise that money than it's actually worth. And you can kind of run down a path where you think, well, yeah, but I really need $500, or I really need $1,000. I need everything I can get. That can actually get in the way of raising enough funds to become sustainable. And then when you're doing your fundraising, and we can spend a whole hour talking about this, but tracking your return on investment, and that includes both staff costs as well as actual costs to go out and raise that money. So you're going to find, as we talk about this, that what seems like might be the scariest or the hardest asks that you can do actually have the best return on investment. And then, of course, you want to keep track of your successes, both in the money that you raise and the friends that you raise. So we'll talk a little bit too about how, as we go through things, we think about what we, because we're investing over a period of time, and so much of fundraising is networking and future investment, building friends, building people who are willing to support you. It doesn't always happen in the first moment. It's something that it has to allow time for. So now we're to tools. Different fundraising tools that you need. Collateral is, you need to make sure you have a good, clear, and consistent message. And that can be harder than it sounds to get away from just that lingo, to avoid the stuff that makes sense in our world, like SEL, and saying things like, that's probably one of the biggest buzzwords we use right now, but even STEM, and making sure that we're going further than just saying these buzzwords that mean different things to different people, and coming up with a clear message. So one of the things that we worked really hard on was, how can we say what change we do, what we provide for kids? And with that, we've come up with like courage, confidence, and connection, which is a different way of saying social emotional learning, but it's also more comfortable because some people don't like certain terms. Buzzwords get negative connotations attached to them. But it's also the fact that anytime you use a buzzword like that, it can be interpreted in a different way. So you want to make sure that your message is as clear as you possibly can. When you think about social media, use it. Not all of us love it. Some of us are really good at it. I appreciate the people who are really good at it. But anything that we do online is really important. And making sure that you have a user-friendly donor system. So if you're not in the habit already of doing individual donations, you really want to think about how your people are able to donate to you and what your thank you process is. It's considered to be best practice to thank people within 24 hours of receiving their donation. So do you have a system to do that? And remembering that the one-time gift can become the second, third, and fourth time gift, or long-term donors. And long-term donors can turn into bequests and wills. However, we have to take care of those donors. And oftentimes we focus on getting new donors versus retaining and taking care of our existing donors. So make sure that once someone does engage with us and that we do receive a donation from them, that we're able to follow up with them in a good way and keep them engaged. It's less expensive to take care of existing customers than it is to recruit new customers. But so many businesses and nonprofits tend to focus on going after the new and forgetting to take care of the existing ones. So that's all part of that process. And when you're telling your story, try to use words like for impact instead of not for profit. So we tend to, because of the 501c3 unit verbiage that the government uses for us, and that's an important fact for people to know when it comes to donating. We do say we're a 501c3 or a not-for-profit organization, but when we talk about ourselves as much as we can, we talk about the fact that we're an impact organization and that we're a cause. Charity tends to have a mindset of not enough, a scarcity mindset. Whereas when you can talk about your cause, you feel like you have a mindset more of growth and future and impact. Your message is your mission statement. What is it you're trying to achieve? And we talk about involvement over informing, partly because the more involved our donors are, the more likely they are to continue being donors, whether they're foundations, whether they're individual donors, community, family, it doesn't really matter. Informed is the first thing you do. Involving is the greater level. The more they're closer to your kids, the more opportunity that they have to interact or to see things up front, the more likely they are to stay engaged. And we do work in a world, I said it's a competitive world. It is a competitive world, but I have personally found that the more we collaborate and the stronger the message of collaboration that we send out, the further ahead that we are, the more engaged our donors are and our partners. Because one way or another, we are all in this together, even though in all fairness, we are looking for the same funds. So I'm going to pause for a second here and see if we have any questions or comments. Anybody?
I don't have any in the chat. I see none in the chat. Deidre
Sure.
does have her hand raised.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
So I did come on here through my registry with the child care. So I'm really happy for all of the information. I'm really excited that I came on today because I have a child care center and a nonprofit for youth services. So are you able to tell us like how, if you have a nonprofit, and my goal is to use, a lot of the resources that I have from my youth services to help the children that are in need because of the area that I'm in. How do you, I don't know how to say it, like how do you mix the two, but not, mix the two, make sure they're, separate so that you can prioritize, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but how do you make it to where you're keeping it as two, entities, but you're still, taking care of your nonprofit, which is, essentially helping the youth, helping the children in this case.
So if I can clarify that, you have two separate organizations, one basically a for-profit childcare and the other one a nonprofit arm providing services to the kids in that childcare.
Kids, period, not just in the child care, but kids in general, children in general in the community. Children
in general. That might be a good one for us to take offline because that is a little bit of a unique situation. But I think in general, what I would say to that is that you have as you're showing the needs and you make sure that your financial accounting is very clear and separate, and that the funds that you do get are accounted for very separately, and that the story that you're telling is around the nonprofit arm. What I have found is sometimes in regards to those situations, less might be better. So if you're explaining away the childcare part, that might be bringing the question in. So if you focus on the nonprofit part and the work that you're doing with that, it's quite possibly not relevant that you have the childcare side of it. But you are welcome to reach out to me directly.
Thank you.
Yep. And I think we had another question in there. Sonia? In the chat? Nope.
We do. We have a question from Cassandra. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. The question was here. I may have missed. Oh, from Janice. It says, how do you prioritize time on lapsed donors?
Sure. So prioritizing donors in general is a bit of a science, and lapsed donors, just like who's a major donor, varies from organization to organization. Some people might consider a lapsed donor someone who hasn't been involved in 2 years, or someone else it might be 3 years. Just like someone might consider a major donor someone who gives $100, or another organization might consider a major donor someone who gives $5,000 or $10,000. But I think when it comes to prioritizing donors, what we try to do is kind of re-identify with the ones that have lapsed and see if we can re-engage them. Both looking at the level of donations that they gave. So if we had a one-time gift from someone who maybe it was $50, we might consider that to be something that was done in passing. Maybe that was a grandparent, someone who gave a gift because of one of their students, that the likelihood of them coming back is pretty insignificant. Usually the larger the gift, the more interested or invested the individual was in the organization to start with. One thing is, don't be afraid to have conversations with people who have or may give you money. That was one of the things that struggled with me. So there's no reason why you can't call a lapsed donor and say, hey, I would just like to talk, we're trying to improve our processes. I'm just doing some investigation. I'd just like to talk to you about why you gave in the first place, and what is it that caused you to stop giving? You can ask those questions. And sometimes we really just need to ask. I would probably pick a handful and target them. And then I would also try to connect to them. So I like a warm connection. So someone on my board or someone I knew in the community, another community leader, could connect with them and reintroduce me. That's probably how I would come back to them. Okay, so there's different sources of funds, lots and lots of different sources of funds. You folks mentioned a lot of them, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. State and federal can kind of blur the lines on who they are until you get the funds. Of course, you know the difference. So there's lots of different grant opportunities out there. One thing I will mention is that, depending on the likelihood of you getting funded or receiving funding is usually relative to how close they are to you in a geographical proximity. So a foundation that's closer to you is going to be more inclined to provide you funds. A corporation who has employees in your area are going to be more inclined to provide you funds. Some of the other opportunities, and the same things apply, are businesses, sponsorships. One thing that a lot of folks tend to forget about are the service clubs. So when we're looking at raising around $50,000 a year, we can consider things like, again, a return on investment. So if you think about how you are currently raising funds and then how you might raise funds. So depending on the service clubs in your area, they love to have folks come in and tell their story. Every meeting that they have, which is usually once a week, they want someone new to come in and talk about the impact, talk about the work they're doing in the community. Those are usually pretty easy relationships to find someone that in the club. You're usually not too removed from someone. And then getting the ability to speak in front of the club. And we'll talk about that a little bit. I like to make sure I introduce myself before I ask for money. Giving circles is something that's becoming more and more popular in our community. The Women's 100 Club, which the goal was 100 women to give $100 3 times a year, has grown into almost 500 women doing that. And the impact of their gifts is significant. In-kind opportunities are anything from people donating food or clothes, anything that your young people can use, sometimes services. And then, of course, the other limit opportunities are pretty much unlimited. When we start thinking about fundraising events and activities, this is where I really encourage you to think about how much money you want to raise and what your return on investment is. And we're definitely in a shifting landscape right now. So I do see a significant difference between event dinners and spaghetti dinners. So speaking about event dinners, this is a great way. Those might be luncheons, they might be breakfasts. Again, happy to have a longer conversation on that. But that's a great way to introduce people to your programs, tell your story, possibly get your young people in front of these other folks, and be able to ask for funds. Now, there's different ways to do that. Some organizations prefer to charge a fee to go to an event. We started out doing that. That actually was not the most successful way to do it, nor is it considered research-based the most successful way to do it. We moved to not charging for events, having people that we know, whether it was board members or community members, friends, strong leaders that we know, families that are influential, invite guests to the event, put on a nice, tight, concise event, tell our story, and ask for a donation at the end. If you are going to do that, I highly encourage you not to act like you're not going to ask for money. So you make sure that when people are invited, they know that, no, we're not charging you to attend, but there will be an opportunity to donate at the end if you're so inspired. And then the other thing is that you make sure that you honor their time and that you do this in a way that recognizes that this is oftentimes their first point of entry to your organization. So the second year you could expect a more significant gift, but it takes a while to build on the event dinners. A lot of the funds that are raised at the dinners are often raised ahead of time as sponsorships from businesses. Auctions can be done online, they can be done in person. They're obviously the most financially viable if you get items donated and you don't have people purchasing items. With that, we avoid putting auctions at like our event dinner because that competes with the amount of money that we raise. Though you could line up an auction with a spaghetti dinner, that's a little bit different, or a golf outing. Golf outings are huge. A lot of people are doing them. Those tend to generate about $26,000 an event. That's the average. I can tell you, we've been doing golf outings now for about 3 or 4 years. We're still building ours. It takes a while. Our event dinners we've been doing for over 20 years, and we seat well over 400 people and raise well over $100,000, depending on what's going on. A lot of folks are doing races. What I refer to as spaghetti dinners, those tend to be more family events. Our event dinners are I'll say fancy, if you will. They're very high end. They're very intentional and strategic about who comes, whereas a spaghetti dinner, you might charge a price at the door. And then that's a good time to pair an auction. And then you have your participant sales. So that's where your kids are going out and they're selling gift wrap or they're selling candy bars. That tends to be more of a Band-Aid kind of solution. And a lot of adults are getting exhausted with that, right? They're just kind of overdone with having to sell products. And it's the hard way to get to $50,000. Easy opportunities, if you will, low-hanging fruit, which are not necessarily big opportunities, are like affiliate giving programs. Sometimes our local grocery stores will do those, or department stores, retail, restaurant. Amazon used to do one, they're not doing them anymore. If you're not working with wage reimbursement programs, I suggest you reach out to your local colleges and universities. They will often fund, reimburse you, or pay for your staff wages or a percentage of your staff wages. And most of you are probably doing some kind of state or federal food program, but those are great ways to both get the cost of your food covered, as well as provide reimbursements to you. That I know the CFCP program that we use provides will reimburse us in excess of the amount we spend as long as we reinvest it in the program. That's been significant for our organization. Okay,
We do have a question in the chat.
yes.
It's from Hillary. She says, does all of this equally apply to a for-profit childcare center? As far as fundraising, as a for-profit, it feels tacky to ask for money. Should we be doing the events and activities only, or am I overthinking that? I am more or less looking for startup funds.
Yes, so that is a big question, the difference between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. I am speaking on this through the lens of a not-for-profit. There are some organizations and individuals who will give money to a for-profit, but the donation laws are different. Most of your foundations will not give money. If you are not a legal 501c3, you can get fiduciaries, you can get individuals to act on your behalf and accept funds on your behalf under certain circumstances. It's really the difference between people feeling like they're investing in, your business that is designed to make profit or money for you versus a not-for-profit, which is designed not to provide any kind of gain, if you will, for individuals, and then provide services to the community. So if you are a for-profit and you're asking for funds in any capacity, I think you need to have just a lot of thought around how you're asking and the justification of that ask when you have a different delineation and different purpose, if you will. Even though I understand you're probably doing much of the same work, it's just a little different, but it is definitely significantly different in the eyes of the donors. Okay, let's talk about how we ask. How we ask is fun. So we are connected to just about anybody. Most of you are, and that 6 degrees of separation is now probably about 2. And the closer you can get to talk to somebody, the further ahead that you are. So that's the warm introductions. We'll send out a note to, I have key groups of people. I have a community advisory board, which is a non-governing board. I have a governing board. I have people I've worked with for years that I just trust and believe in the organization. And I might send out a note and say, hey, does anybody know so-and-so or this foundation? Do you have a connection here? Can you make an introduction for us? Can you invite them to our fundraising event? I'd like to get to know this person. If I call on them and make a cold call, they are less likely to take my call or be interested, or at the very least, they won't hear me in the same way as if a mutual friend introduces us. That's definitely worth the time. Not on the first date means I don't kiss on the first date. So anytime that you can not ask for money the first time you meet somebody, the better off you are. So like when I mentioned with the service clubs, if you can go and make a presentation and don't ask. With a service club like a Rotary or a Kiwanis, chances are by the time you finish with your presentation, they're going to ask what you need. And that's an opportunity for you to tell them. But to really be able to get out there and tell your story before you're asking for money. Dear grandma, don't show up only when you want money. And then of course, forget to send the thank you card, right? Our donors don't appreciate that any more than our grandparents do. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining a relationship with our donors. Newsletters are worth the investment and the time. Thank you letters are definitely required. A phone call is very beneficial. They can be hard to get to. We avoided them for years just because of time. And now at the end of all of our events, we kind of spread the list around between staff and board members. And we not only send written thank yous, but we have people just make calls and get a lot of voicemails, but we're still making calls. We want to tell the story. We've talked about telling the story a lot. So making sure we're telling the story and bringing our donors in closer to our kids, giving tours, having them visit our program, having them check out different opportunities to to just get in there and see the kids. If you're going to have an event, getting your kids at the event whenever possible. And then tying that in with what their priorities are. If someone's giving priorities are around perhaps human trafficking or the humane societies and animals, you know, they may be interested in giving to you, but they're already giving to good causes, and those may be the causes that they choose to limit to. So it's nice if you can decide ahead of time who has similar giving priorities. And that's an absolute must when it comes to foundations or grants or asking for any kind of funds like that. And that sense of urgency, not desperation. And that's one of the reasons why I can't say enough to not wait until you are in a position where you have to have the money and you're 6 months out from closing your doors before you start thinking about where these different funds are going to come from. So one of the things that you can do if you don't need money, but you may need money in the future, is just start finding ways, small things that you can ask for funding for, or just get your messaging out in the community, just so you can start building those relationships and those networks before you're in a position where you absolutely have to have that funds. Different vehicles you can use. In person is always best. And there is nothing that will replace an in-person conversation, especially with a major donor. But you certainly want to make sure that you have the ability to do your mobile giving. Mailings can be effective once or twice a year. They no longer carry the weight that I think there was a lot of emphasis put on those in the past. Don't really see a lot of, depending on the organization, like I know some organizations who do really, really well with a mailing. That is also their main means of fundraising and asking their donors for funds. Our mailings aren't necessarily as big, though we do them because they're an opportunity to engage some folks, and some folks prefer to do it that way. But our main point of contact for us is our dinner. So chances are you are going to somewhat compete with yourself. And you just want to prioritize where you're getting the best bang for your buck. And having a good website, yes, anymore, that's where people go to find us. Monthly donors are wonderful, and they can become a very good, sustainable means for us. So if you make that easy and you figure out how to engage them, a lot of times those can be like past families. Like if your current participants aren't paying fees, I would work really hard on trying to turn them into monthly donors, even if it's only $10 or $15 a month. And some of them will, even though they're paying fees. Sometimes your alumni families, they'll pay fees. Now their kids are no longer using it, but they saw the benefit of it, and they'll pay it forward for someone else's young person. But you definitely want to make sure that you're telling them what's happening with their money. That's true in any case. And then sometimes your monthly donors or donors in general, you know, never forget about those matching programs. So it might be through someone's employer. Some of your local foundations will do matching programs, whether they're one-time gifts or monthly donors. So something to think about around that. So I'm going to pause again and see if we have any questions now.
No more questions.
Perfect. So one thing I guess I'd like to ask everyone is, we've covered kind of a lot of ground. If you could put in the chat something you'll do differently, some thought that this conversation has spurred in you, something that you're currently doing that you find effective. What's something we can do and share with each other about raising funds and creating sustainability inside our programs? Anybody?
Someone says, emphasizing the impact of local networking. I would work on my wording when applying for grants or funding. Telling my story is a great idea. Developing a user-friendly donation system. Mhm.
The online technology has definitely made it easier for online donations and any kind of donation system. We've used several different softwares. We just moved into what's called Bloomerang. We're in the process of transitioning over to that one. That is making it easier for our donors. One of the challenges around those systems is they're not inexpensive, so they're not necessarily a good choice for early organizations. You know, we're 20 years in before we could probably afford some of those. That's just our personal circumstances. But any kind of system that you do, keeping it organized, having someone prioritize it inside your organization is really important. What else, Sonia?
Sure. Someone else said the statement you made about for impact, not for profit, really impacted me. Someone else said networking in areas I didn't think of before. And then someone just mentioned, I am at the beginning of the process, so first dates without an ask.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear all those comments. I appreciate that. You know, the work that we're doing is so huge and so significant, and it's just so important that to be able to share that message with people and not feel like you're apologizing. People want to donate money. People, you are making other people's dreams come true. And I think that's what you just, if you focus on that, people want the world to be a better place, but in their jobs and their everyday lives, they're not doing what you're able to do. So you're giving them an opportunity to invest in the future for their kids, for their grandkids, for communities that they care about. You're doing the work and the lift while they're able to provide the financial aspect of that. I was scared to death to ask for money. For years, I pretended like I wasn't asking for money. What I have found is that fundraising and fund development is actually fun. There really is a fun in there. And that those gains that you get and those wins go a long way when you really look at the impact. The other thought around that is don't be afraid to hear a no. You're going to hear no's. No's are okay. And they're okay because it might not be the right time for people. It might not be the priority for people, but it's not personal and it doesn't take away from the work that you're doing. Any other comments in there, Sonia?
None. That was the last one regarding the first dates without an ask.
Okay. Better, as close as we can get to our individuals, as informed as we can make them, the bigger the gift you will receive, and the more likely they are to stay involved. So we're going to invite you to take this survey. I'm going to invite you to discoveryou.org. You're welcome to email me directly. I'm with the Rock Center for Youth Development as well as discoveryou.org. Our overarching organization is the Rock Center for Youth Development, and discoveryou.org has actually become a revenue stream intended to help create our sustainability. So it's both part of our mission and it's part of our ability to raise funds in a different way that aren't as attached to our approaching the philanthropic community. Did you want to add anything, Sonia, before I mention our next training?
No, I will say that we have a cohort going now around the Discover You, and it has been one of the most amazing communities of practice, and we thank you for that partnership, Bev. So take a look at the discoveryou.org website as Bev directed you and get more information about all their trainings that they offer as well.
Yes, thank you. Discover You is actually, whereas I'm here today talking to you about fund development and fundraising, Discover You is a program created by the Rock that is intended to train adults, help equip and inspire adults who work with young people. And currently we are fortunate to say the state has provided funding for those of you who are in the state of Michigan to be able to participate in these trainings without having a direct fee to your organization. So you're welcome to jump on the trainings. We have another one starting in April, and they go pretty regularly. There's also different professional development and consulting opportunities available. But as I said, it's fully funded right now, and it's a lot around building social emotional learning in young people. It's around helping to increase resiliency skills. It helps our young friends to, it provides activities and workshops that you can use. You can also just use it, you can use it in its entirety, or you can use it kind of out of however it fits into your programs. And then you can also use it for your continuing education credits. And yes, it's discoveryou.org or the ROC4YD.org. So it's both organizations. The ROC is the part for our organization that provides our out of school time programming in our community. So that brings us to the end. I welcome conversations or emails directly. Happy to have a conversation with you around specific needs.